Alright, welcome back. I apologize for the perhaps poor audio. Looks like I'm in the yellow. Let me get down to the green, adjusting my audio input levels. So, yep, I'm just going to keep going through this. Unfortunately, a lot of it's not going to work. I'm just kind of off the rails right now. But the plan is to just try to get through, read everything, kind of prime myself. And then at the end of this chapter, go and do the actual tutorial from the real Python site. So kind of the bad news with that is we've got a lot to go in this chapter. Another thing is it looks like there's one of the exercises is to use another container technology, such as Podman, and that's something I definitely want to do. I'm not sure if I'll be doing that if I just do the tutorial and kind of ignore the last part of this chapter in the book. But and of course the other downside is it's just going to be a lot more work. It's going to delay the time it takes me to finish reading this book. But the goal is not to necessarily finish reading the book, is to get valuable skills that I can apply on the job, so whether I finish the book or not isn't as important as that. And I know for sure that the tutorial on Real Python is absolutely solid, and I can reference it on the job too, because it's just all free here. I don't have to log into anything. As long as I have an internet connection, I have access to the materials I use to study and gain the skills that got me that job. Okay, so yeah, this is gonna be it, I believe. Now, let's see here. Shoot. Okay, let me go back to my bookmark. Okay, and actually, I do want to really pin down what the actual tutorial is called. I don't want to lose that, because pretty darn soon I'll be going through that. I'm probably going to finish up. So it's the Flask by Example tutorial. Yep, and here's part one. Yep, so this tutorial is, I think, like 9 parts. It's going to take me a while to get through. Yeah, so if we mark this as completed. Oops, okay, so you can only track your progress if you create an account. That's okay, you can just track it some other way. But what I do want, before I continue reading this book, is just an overview of what this course is going to be, because I'm going to be doing this pretty soon. I probably finish the chapter today, so hopefully I can start that today. Let's just search for Flask by Example, because I want to get like a course overview. Yeah, so let me do like a learning path. Here we go. Perfect. This is exactly what I wanted. Yep, so this is the learning path. It's all about Flask, which is a micro framework. It's kind of like Django, but it's more limited, less features, as far as I understand it. Let me actually kind of not speak to it so much until I start working through, and then at the end of this tutorial, I'll give a much better explanation of it. Okay. Yeah, there's something called confirmation bias, where you kind of get a sense of something, and then you just continually try to solidify your sense of that, and you don't do things that check if your sense of that is correct or not. So you can actually feed yourself down a rabbit hole of disinformation, consistently trying to check and confirm what you believe without ever taking a check on, wait, is what I believe actually factual? So this was a good example of it, saying, oh, well, Flask is this and that and that. And it's like, well, come on, I did do a tutorial on Flask, but if my goal is to finish another one, I should really put those preconceived notions aside, and then once I'm done with this tutorial, really evaluate my understanding of Flask, not just kind of feed my own misconceptions, and then as I go through the tutorial, only focus on things that confirm what I already believed instead of things that challenge it. That's a lot easier to do, is to focus on things that confirm what you already believe, because things that challenge what you already believe, oftentimes you just go in and out and you can't even see them because there's just nothing. Your brain works so that things that you completely are unfamiliar with, even if they're perhaps easier concepts, they're harder for you to learn. So they're harder for you to even take in and recognize. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to try to read a little bit and then move the bookmark. I will need to take a quick break soon, but I can come right back at it pretty much. Let's see here. So, yep, okay, so we're gonna, before I start reading again, and I apologize because I realize a lot of this is kind of dead time for some people who might want to be looking at the book, following along, or whatever. But I'm going to boot up my lab, so that's ready to go when I need it. All right. The goal here is to run the migrations service defined previously in the docker-compose.yaml_ file to tie the +sops secret management method into docker-compose, decrypt the environments.secrets file with sops-d, source its contents into the current shell, then invoke docker-compose up-d migrations using one command line that will not expose the secret to the shell history. So here we go, source docker-compose up-d migrations. Okay, so yeah, unfortunately I'm not going to be able to do this. I understand what they're doing, though. I believe they're starting up. So these colons here, whoops. So this $sign means it's a bash prompt, kind of like a Python prompt. So if we open a command prompt here, this is a command prompt for Windows. We also have a command prompt for Python, and then we also have command prompts for Bash, which I believe I have installed here. Yep, so that it's just a command prompt is what this $sign means. You can see that Bash has a $sign there as its character, prompt character. For Python, it's 3 chevrons, and for Windows, it's a single chevron. The next character that is relevant to the actual command line interface, the first one is this, that lets you know that it's a bash command line interface or command prompt, those are interchangeable, is this semicolon, and that's a character you can use in a bash prompt to issue multiple commands in a single line. So the first command we would be issuing is a source command. It enables a virtual environment, or I'm actually not too sure about what the source command actually does. I use it to enable Python virtual environments, but it sounds like really what it does is it sets up like environments, so it like toggles your settings in Bash or something like that. Might want to look into that a little bit more. Maybe I'll learn about it as I'm doing this. For now, though, I think I'm just gonna move on. And then we can see we're using our SOPs decrypt, so we're feeding in our protected password, and we're feeding that into this Docker compose up command, and we're starting up our database, successfully authenticating to it without exposing our password, using really good security practices. Oh, okay. So, yep, I'll be back. I got to take a quick break here. When I come back, I'll start here. All right, I am back. Verify that the migrations were successfully run by inspecting the database and verifying that 2 tables were created: alembic_version and results. So this is Docker compose exec db. So let's see if both of those were created. Aha. So we got those 2 created. Yeah, and as I said, I'm just kind of giving it up in my lab right now. At the end of this chapter, we'll go through the actual tutorial, so like all this stuff will be, will look nice. It's kind of been hard to follow along with this book sometimes because the output has been really jumbled. Here you can see, look at this, it's all nice and clean. And not only that, copying and pasting is disabled. You can only open specified links in the book, so I'm just going to kind of try to breeze through this as fast as I can, and then spend the real work on the learning path offered by realpython.com. Part 4 in the Flask by Example tutorial is to deploy a Python worker process based on Python RQ that talks to an instance of Redis. First, Redis needs to run. Add it as a service called Redis into the docker compose.yaml file, and make sure that its internal port 6379 is mapped to port 6379 on the local OS. So here's that port mapping. Start the Redis service on its own by specifying it as an argument to docker compose up. Run docker ps, and here's how we did that. Run docker ps to see a new Docker container running based on the Redis Alpine image. Alright, so this is all outputs. The next step is to create a service called worker for the Python RQ worker process in docker-compose.yaml. Run the worker service just like the Redis service with docker-compose up-d. Running docker ps will show the worker container. Look at the worker container logs with docker-compose logs. Okay, and we're just skimming this. At the end of this chapter, I'll be doing a deep dive into the tutorial. Now launch the main Flask application in its own container. Create a new service called app in docker-compose.yaml. Map port 500 from the application container, the default port for a Flask application, to port 5000, to port 5000 on the local machine. So we'll be mapping port 5000 on the container to port 5000 on the local machine. Pass the command manage.py run server --host equals 0.0.0.0 to the application container to ensure that port 5000 is exposed correctly by the Flask application inside the container. Start up the app service with docker compose up-d while also running sops-d for your secure password storage on the encrypted file containing dbpass, then sourcing the decrypted file before calling docker-compose. Okay, here we go. Notice the new Docker container running the application in the list returned by Docker PS. Inspect the logs of the application container with docker-compose logs. Running docker-compose logs with no other arguments allows us to inspect the logs of all the services defined in the docker-compose.yaml file. Again, just skimming through this, we'll see it in more detail when I do the tutorial. The final step is to test the application. Visit http://127.0.0.1:500 and enter python.org in the URL field. At that point, the application sends a job to the worker process, asking it to execute the function _count _and function count _and _save _words against the home page of python.org. The application periodically pulls the job for the results, and upon completion, it displays the word frequencies on the home page. To make the docker-compose.yaml file more portable, push the Flask by example Docker image to Docker Hub and reference the Docker Hub image in the container section for the app and worker services. Tag the existing local Docker image Flask by example :v1 with a name prefixed by a Docker Hub username, then push the newly tagged image to Docker Hub. Change docker-compose.yaml to reference the new Docker Hub image. Here is the final version of docker-compose.yaml. Alright, so to restart the local Docker containers, run docker-compose down followed by docker-compose up-d. Alright, and I'm sure in the one I do, it's not going to be exactly like that. That's okay, we'll just skip the example in the book. It sounded like it wasn't, because I'm, like, I want to do, like, DevOps as related to, like, network engineering, so it sounds like the example in the book isn't really about that anyway. Note how easy it is to bring up and down a set of Docker containers with Docker Compose. Tip: even if you want to run a single Docker container, it is still a good idea to include it in a docker-compose.yaml file and launch it in the docker-compose up-d command. It will make your life easier when you want to add a second container into the mix, and it will also serve as a mini infrastructure as code example with the docker-compose.yaml file reflecting the state of your local Docker setup for your application. Alright, so let me move the bookmark. Okay, and let's take a look at how much else there is to go. Okay, so there's just a little bit more to go in chapter 11, so I think what I'm going to do in this video is finish out chapter 11. Unfortunately, we'll probably skip through the exercises, kind of take another L for this chapter. But the good news is from this chapter we were given this really valuable tutorial to go through. So at the end of this chapter, I'll be taking kind of a pause before starting chapter 12, and I'll be doing this instead of moving right away to chapter 12. But until then, let's go ahead and finish chapter 11. So next section in chapter 11 is porting the Docker-Compose services to a new host and operating system. We will now show how to take the Docker-Compose setup from the preceding section and port it to a server running Ubuntu 18.04. Launch an Amazon EC2 instance running Ubuntu 18.04 and install Docker-Engine and Docker-Compose. Okay. All right, so we see we've got a number of sudo commands here. So and we've got these. More importantly, we've got these $signs, which means this is the beginning of our bash prompt. So here we don't have a sudo, but we're still feeding in a bash command. Bash command is curl. Here we got a $sign, but it's a part of this. I'm actually not sure what this is about. Looks like it's just like a file. I'm not sure what's going on there. But yeah, we'll just skim it. The main thing is going to be the tutorial. Copy the docker-compose.yaml file to the remote EC2 instance and start the DB service first so that the database used by the application can be created. Docker-compose up-d docker ps use docker exec to run the psql-u postgres command inside the running Docker container for the postgre SQL database. At the postgre SQL prompt, create the word count database and word count underscore db admin role. Okay. Before launching the containers for the services defined in docker-compose.yaml, two things are necessary. Number one, run Docker login to be able to pull the Docker image pushed previously to Docker Hub. Number two, set the db pass environment variable to the correct value in the current shell. The sops method described in the local Mac OS setup can be used, but for this example, set it directly in the shell. Now launch all the services necessary for the application by running docker-compose up-d. Perfect. Okay. At this point, after allowing access to port 5000 in the AWS security group associated with our Ubuntu EC2 instance, which is the reason I really couldn't get this to work, is I don't have that EC2 instance. I'm not sure what they're talking about there, but I'm going to be doing this in my home lab when I follow the tutorial. You can hit the external IP of the instance on port 5000 and use the application. It's worth emphasizing one more time how much Docker simplifies the deployment of applications. The portability of Docker containers and images means that you can run your application on any operating system where the Docker engine runs. In the example shown here, none of the prerequisites needed to be installed on the Ubuntu server, not Flask, not PostgreSQL, and not Redis. Oh, right, because they're a part of the Docker container. It was also not necessary to copy the application code over from the local development machine to the Ubuntu server. The only file needed on the Ubuntu server was docker-compose.yaml. Then the whole set of services comprising the application was launched with just one command, docker-compose up-d. Beware of downloading and using Docker images from public Docker repositories because of how many of them include serious security vulnerabilities. The most serious of which can allow an attacker to break through the isolation of a Docker container and take over the host operating system. Ooh, that doesn't sound good. A good practice here is to start with a trusted pre-built image or build your own image from scratch. So in case anyone's wondering what that means, in my home lab, if I were to log into that, and I think I have Docker installed on here. I do. So let's do a Docker PS or Docker container ls. Okay, so I don't have any running, but what that security exploit would be is if you have a Docker container running and you're allowing people to access it remotely, let's say it's like a website or something running in a Docker container. A really good example of that is Netbox. There's a potential security vulnerability where by having access to that container, they can also gain access to the machine the container runs on. And obviously that's not a good thing because they could delete the container, bring down all your services. They could delete, zeroize the disk on the machine, bring down countless other services you're running on it. Not a good thing to have left vulnerable on your system. A good practice here is to start with a trusted pre-built image or build your own image from scratch. Stay abreast of the latest security patches and software updates and rebuild your image whenever any of these patches or updates are available. Another good practice is to scan all of your Docker images with one of the many Docker scanning tools available, among them Claire, Anchor, and Falco. Such scanning can be performed as part of a continuous integration / continuous deployment pipeline when the Docker images usually get built. Although docker-compose makes it easy to run several containerized services as part of the same application, it is only meant to be run on a single machine, which limits its usefulness in production scenarios. You can really only consider an application deployed with docker-compose to be production ready if you are not worried about downtime and you are willing to run everything on a single machine. This being said, Grig has seen hosting providers running Dockerized applications in production with docker-compose. For true production-ready scenarios, you need a container orchestration engine such as Kubernetes, which will be discussed in the next chapter. Okay, so here's some exercises. First exercise is to take a look at the Docker file reference. So we'll just look over that really briefly here. Yeah, that's going to be useful. Docker has really good documentation. Next is to look at the docker-compose configuration reference. Just look at that briefly. Create an AWS KMS key and use it with SOPs instead of a local PGP key. This allows you to apply AWS IAM permissions to the key and restrict access to the key to only the developers who need it. I'm going to skip that. Hopefully there's something about security in the classical example learning path. Write a shell script that uses docker exec or docker-compose exec to run post GRESQL commands necessary for creating a database and a role. That might be an interesting one to do. But you know what, I think I'm going to skip that because I wasn't able to get that database running, or it's, yeah, I want to skip that, but that's always a good exercise, even if you're not good at, especially if you're not good at scripting, actually. If you have, and then for me, like, I have my blog, so like any script I write, I can just throw up on my blog. If I'm on the job, just go back and grab it. So this is one thing I kind of hate to skip, because this could really help me out in the future if I write a script that does that. I can go back and reference it. But I'm still going to skip it. Again, hopefully, I'm not sure what's going to be in here, but I'm sure there will be some pretty good stuff. Experiment with other container technologies such as Podman. So that's another one I really like to do, but I'm gonna do that on my own. I'm gonna do that. Sorry, I'm not gonna do that as part of this series, unfortunately. I'm just gonna skip that and move on to the learning path, and then after that move on to chapter 12. So we got some footnotes here. First one, this is a default URL address. Your IP address will be different. Always good to clarify that. I think for absolute beginners, one of the biggest barriers to learning about computers or whatever is understanding that there are parts of a text, of a string, that are meant to be changed. So there are static parts of it, and then there are variable parts of it, and a lot of people who are just going on Stack Overflow, desperately trying to make something work, who are pretty much brand new, or have limited experience, don't understand that and end up just putting in nonsense that makes no sense to their local system. So I like how they called that out in the footnotes. That's useful for people who don't have a lot of experience, I think. All right, so yep. So when I come back to reading this book, I'll be starting on chapter 12, so I don't need this old bookmark anymore. But until then, I'll be working through this Flask by example learning path. I wish they would give you like a time to completion, estimated time to completion on these. It's kind of frustrating that they don't do that. I have no idea how long this will take me, but if it's anything like the last one that I did, okay, I can connect with my GitHub. That's good. It shouldn't, or even if it's anything like the last one I did, even if it takes me a while to complete, the amount of knowledge and experience I gain from doing it will be worth it, I think. Okay, so that's it for this video, the end of chapter 11. Stay tuned for the next one, where I go through the real Python Flask by example learning path.